you're watching us from. On the behalf of Nepal Institute of International Cooperation and Engagement and the Water Policy Center, it gives me a great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers, chair, and the participants who have joined this session. To chair this session, we have Major General Binayak with us today. It's my pleasure to introduce the chair. Major General Binayak is a political and security analyst and has previously served as a brigade commander, general commanding officer, and a deputy chief of the staff. Major Basnyat has hold 35 years of experience in the Nepalese army and with the United Nations of peacemaking operation. He represented the army and the country in various international meets, capacity building, peace efforts, reintegration, election, governance, rule of law, and humanitarian affairs. He has further experience and headed prestigious military training institutions like Nepali Army Military Academy, Nepali Army Command and Staff College, and Chief Instructor of Higher Command and Management course, Nepali Army War College. He holds Master's in Philosophy degree in Defense and Strategic Studies with first class from University of Madras. He has devotedly involved in political and security analysis, advising, writing, editing, and participating in intellectual capacity in geopolitics and national security, and researching about China and South Asia. Without extending further, let me request Major General Binayak to take charge of this session.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, kind introduction. You know, as we enter the third or the last day and the second to last session, it gives me great happiness to chair the 20th session of the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, NICE, and the Water Policy Center, WPC International Conference on Post-Pandemic World Order, Navigating New Normal. Let me take this opportunity to commend Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, Research Director, and the entire NICE team for professionally putting together such a seminar, webinar, with the 30 sessions and the participants from 30 countries. Great job. You have created volumes of knowledge that could be referred to by policymakers. Of the four, it is also pleasing to comprise a female panelist, which makes almost 33% of what we in Nepal claim about for gender equality. Great to have distinguished panelists from Bangladesh and India with a wide range of specialization and practitioners. To the panelists, we have been communicated, observers, and who have joined to listen to this session. This session will last for 90 minutes, and the presentations by the panelists will be for a maximum of 15 minutes. I will sound after 20 minutes. There will be a 30 minutes Q&A. As for questions, please send it to the chat box. The questions can be directed either to any of the panelists. The questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Now, before introducing the panelists, let me take 3 minutes to cover briefly the geostrategic environment. The world and the government, big or powerful, small or weak, is being criticized about the handling of COVID-19. The global increase of COVID-19 is stressing budgets and reordering national and international security priorities. The world body, the WHO and the UN, is also being questioned. The grand strategic goals, geostrategic plans, and diplomacy campaigns are being executed by great power rivalry during the pandemic will lay the course for possible disorder or a new order influencing the future global order. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, let me quote him, quote, "The single greatest threat to the United States comes from the Chinese Communist Party. President Donald Trump is aiming to hold them accountable for the enormous loss of life all across the world and the trillions of dollars in the economic harm," unquote. During India-US Business Council, he also said, the free world must change or China will change the free world, reiterating the importance of India. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on a tour to Europe to consolidate cooperative endeavors and reject all kinds of provocations. The two have sufficient political wisdom and are equipped with the strategic focus to make correct choices that benefit both sides and all of humanity, with 4-point proposals on building China-EU partnership, hinting that the US is behind. He has been spelling out that China-United States relationships are facing their most serious challenge since the establishment of diplomatic ties. The US election is less than 90 days. Prime Minister Modi's diplomatic approach with the first neighborhood policy, as well as to bring together multilateral organizations, SAARC or BIMSTEC, is being contended. The militarizations in the Himalayas is striding. When great power China and the rising power India are approaching to normalize the relationship with informal talks between Modi and Xi, both in Wuhan and Malappuram, the Galwan border skirmishes has added another sea confrontation when cooperation and competitions were evident. Just this morning, China denied and said that the PLA have always strictly observed the line of actual control and have never crossed the line that India accused for border violation. So the strategic balance policy that India was approaching is being debated. The traditional security architecture is being questioned. With a wolf warrior diplomacy and the strengthening of muscles in the Indo-Pacific region, though least likely, the likelihood of Cuban Missile Crisis or October Crisis of 1962 cannot be ruled out. With this concise depiction, let me introduce the first panelist, Mr. Afzalur Rahman. He is the lecturer at the Department of International Relations, University of Chittagong, Bangladesh, who will be talking on giving an overview on the COVID-19 and the beginning of a new world order. Mr. Rahman, can I hand it over to you? Mr. Rahman, could you please start? We can't hear you, Mr. Rahman.
Please unmute yourself.
Okay. So, sir, am I audible right now?
Yeah, you're perfect now. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, for giving me the floor, and also Nepal Institute for International Cooperations and Engagement and Water Policy Center, India, for giving me a very wonderful opportunity to present a paper on COVID-19 and beginning of a new order and overview. So, and also the director of Nepal Institute for giving me a chance. Very special thanks to him. Without any delay, in my papers, what I'm gonna try to explain before you. So these are the outline. I just move on to the objectives of my papers. So mainly in these papers, I have one specific aims, and that aims is about how the pandemic like COVID-19 having a correlations with the or impact on the world order system. This is the fundamental aims, and three of my core objectives is this presentation will try to investigate the nature of world order from the very beginning of the birth of nation state in 1648 to present. And secondly, it will try to compare the competitions among the superpower, over the course of history, and how this sort of competition impact on the world system. Okay. And finally, I just try to make conclusions. What will be the nature of future world order? I just try to add conclusions based on my observations. Okay. Now move on to these are the fundamental questions. I just say I already mentioned the questions pattern also with the objectives. How world order changes like over the course of history, and secondly, why does COVID matter for the future global order, and what are the parameters of competitions, and how would be the what would be the changes and challenges. So my methodology is very straightforward. I use the secondary resources for analyzing these presentations or papers. So now move on to the body of my presentations, the background context. You know what, if we study that how whether pandemic have any relations with world order, then we see that there is no direct relations with pandemic and world order until the history suggests us, until today. But there are a number of regions that can change world order. One is war, another one is technological innovations, and number one is ideology. So we see that First World War and the Second World War, these two world war have changed the world order. Okay, after the First World War, we see there is a multipolarity until Second World War. Okay, after Second World War. And after the Second World War, we see the world order also change into bipolarities. Technological innovations also change the world order, like industrial revolutions in Europe also gave the more power to the Britain to rise as an Pax Britannica. Okay, and thirdly, what I say that third one is ideological. We see the fall of USSR, Soviet Russia, is one fine example of how ideology sometimes having a cause for the changing in the world order patterns. So now move on of the very clear classifications of world order from 1648. From 1648 to until 1919, we see there is a mixture of presence of multi-poles world order. That time, one significant hegemon, we see that was the Britain. Britain control as only global single power for majority of the time of that period, like as a Pax Britannica. And secondly, we see from 1919 to up to the Second World War, there is a multipolarity multipolarity or existence of multipolarity that time. One part in USA, another part is Russia, Soviet Russia. In Asia, the Imperial Japan. In Europe, Germany and Italy and France. Okay, so now move on to from the Second World War. We see there is a stable world order system that is called the bipolarity between US and USSR, led by capitalist USA, on the other side socialist USSR. So USSR collapsed in late 1919 because of their ideology was rejected by their member state. So at that time, there was a competition between USA and USSR in international institutions in many places. We see also the NATO, and on the other side, USSR also formed their own, security arena by the Warsaw Pact. Okay, and next, from 1990 to 2016, this was the classification given by Meir Shimir, that after 1919, we see the unipolar moment of the history that was recognized by the former president of USA, Senior Bush, and that was also recognized by the Francis Fukuyama in his popular book, End of the History in 1919. But that sort of narrative challenges by after 1 decade by the Russia, when Vladimir Putin came into power in 1999. From 1999 to until today, he is in power. He challenged the unipolar status of USA in different occasions, like annexing Crimea is one of the significant events in that case. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea in a very controversial referendum taken by the Crimean Authority by using Russian forces. Crimea was a former part of former land of Ukraine, one of the very close allies of Western Europe and USA. So now come to the point of 2016 to 2019, after the huge debate among the global political scientists or international relations experts, that whether we are end of unipolar movement, and that end already we see after the annexations of Crimea, and there is a challenge came from China, Russia and USA. Russia also fought war with Georgia, one of the very close allies of USA, and Russia also stopped USA not to attack the Syria, as Syria is one of the very close allies of Russia. On the other side, China gradually became one of the very influential economic powers right now they are in number one positions. Now move on to the what are the changes we find because of the COVID-19. So COVID-19 give more leverage to some country than other country, and China is gaining more from COVID-19 than other country. I will explain these things a bit later. Now move on to my theoretical framework. So this is the three theoretical framework, very simple, three classifications of world order: bipolar, multipolar, and unipolar. So now move on to the main part of my presentation, discussion part. Mainly the world order or great power dominate the world through their populations or wealth. But I think that population is not so important factors here. Wealth is a factor. If you compare that wealth in there, let's see that right now China is the number one economic country according to the statistics in 2004. I mean, 2019. In 2019, the United States of America spent 38% of world military budget for its military. That is compared to 38% of world military budget. China's 40%. So if we say that what types of experience we are right now encountering because of the COVID-19. Number one is we are right now in a Cold War, new Cold War, okay? That is recognized by political scientists and world leading newspaper also. Already Trump accused WHO, World Health Organization, is a puppet of China, and they already also declared not to contribute in the WHO's fund. And secondly, the productions of Russia's coronavirus vaccine, Sputnik V, also created sort of hue and cry among the scientists, and it also created sort of Cold War style diplomacy, okay, as because Russia is not sharing all the informations to the WHO, in fact, who did not recognize their vaccine. And third, and very important actors is right now in China. In this pandemic time, China did several activities. One of them is China passed a new law for the Hong Kong, one of the autonomous part of China. And right now they undermine that autonomy, and new law will give more power to the mainland Chinese force. And also China have a clash with India, in June, and that clash is the new, this is a new types of clashes that two countries experience in last 45 years, okay? So, and third and next discussion is new world order would be like in a multipolar world order that was present before Second World War without any centralized hegemonic state. And that world order would be like an uncertain world order, because you know what, before Second World War, we see no country did not follow the rule properly, okay? And second point is the power of international institution will be diminished to some extent. Existing power of the financial institution will be challenged by the new institution like AIIB, Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, that was formed in 2016, led by the China, including India, also the member of that bank. Another bank is New Development Bank. Already, many countries pursuing China and AIIB for the loan for recovering the pandemic losses, okay? And next is future of globalization, also uncertain because of the COVID-19. Globalization, already we see that there is a sort of conspiracy, secret diplomacy, and among the mistrust among the nation state. In fact, allies, countries are not trusting their good allies also, okay, as they are not sharing what is going on within the country, and they are not sitting for the conventional foreign minister meeting also, okay. And finally, I want to say that coexistence of mixed and hybrid ideology based on democracy and autocracy will create more problem in coming days. So I cannot say that USA will be declined as a superpower, but they will. But we see that China is an autocratic country, as they have a positive impressions because of controlling the COVID or pandemic well rather than democratic country. So this will create problem as because of coexistence of democracy and autocracy side by side, as Russia also regained their power and they're controlling their neighboring country more than ever before. Okay, so next is the worst case scenarios or very bad scenarios are waiting for the poor and developing countries of the South mainly African countries and Asian developing countries, and they have already faced a huge loss because of the COVID-19. They have a fund crisis, so they will more depend on China, Japan, and some of the prospective donor country for taking loan. And this sort of dependency will create new types of, complex relations between developing country and the donor country. And third, before the COVID-19, you may ask me one question, that whether there is also presence of multipolarity before COVID-19. So what is the difference between that multipolarity and right now multipolarity we have experiencing? I say that multipolarity before COVID-19 was sort of a stable, but right now multipolarity is very volatile and uncertain, and countries do not follow the rules of international institution properly, and most of the countries are truly focused on their own nationalism, and they are solely concerned about their own benefit, not the benefit of other countries. Okay, only a few countries are taking the steps to help their neighboring country. One example I give right now: United States of America, as in a global hegemony in previous, they supported all of their allies and all the nation state countries when they're facing any sort of crisis. Okay, but in this pandemic, USA did not help visibly to their allies country or nation state countries to tackle the pandemic. We know that USA, in fact, they're facing the problem. So if I sum up my whole paper, then I have to say that this paper is a combination of three particular things. It gives you the brief understanding of historical narrative, how historically from the 1648 to until today, world order changes because of war, technological innovations, and ideology. And secondly, how the world great powers are competing with each and others for taking the dominant positions, whether can be the unipolar movement, or it can be the bipolar movement, or it can be the multipolar movement. And finally, I just try to give a very brief future of a future world order based on the experience of COVID-19 that we have until last 9 months. Okay. So thank you very much for all of your patience hearing. I just finished there. I hope I was very conscious about the time. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rahman.
If you have any questions, then you can please.
Yeah, we will take the questions at the end. Mr. Rahman, thank you so much. You just took 14 minutes and 15 seconds. Great timing. And the second panelist today, this evening, is Dr. Mrs. Uma Purushothaman. She's the assistant professor, Central University of Kerala, India, and she's going to talk on the India's options on trends in the post-COVID, post-19 world order. Doctor, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I hope am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Let me first thank NIS and WPC for inviting me for this conference, and special thanks to Dr. Pramod Deswal for insisting that I speak at this session. I'm going to speak on the trends in the post-COVID world order and what the implications, what the options for India are in negotiating the kind of world order that could emerge after COVID. So history does tell us that pandemics have the ability to shape world orders. And just to give a couple of examples, in the 5th century BC, when Athens was this great economic and naval power, there was a plague which ravaged it during the Peloponnesian Wars with Sparta, and this was one of the factors which led to its defeat. Then in the 17th century, had the Italian plague, which completely decimated Venice, which was then a very powerful state, and then you had new powers like England coming up at its expense. So pandemics, revolution, recessions, technological change, war, all of this can change the status of all of the great powers. It can bring about changes in the world order. So clearly, given the double whammy of the global spread of COVID-19 and the economic recession associated with it, we are going to witness some changes in the world order. And like most scholars, I believe that these changes are going to be evolutionary, they're not going to be revolutionary. There's going to be no drastic change as such, but basically some of the trends which were visible before COVID-19 will gather pace. And I've identified 10 trends which I thought are important. I'm sure there are several, I know there are several more, but for the purpose of this conference, I'm going to just talk about 10 trends. So what are these trends? One is, of course, deglobalization, and this is a point which has been made by many, many people after COVID, after the outbreak of COVID. Globalization saw its heights during the 1990s. A lot of people would even call it hyper globalization. So what does globalization? Globalization essentially mean? It means the freedom of movement of people, goods, capital, and ideas. And each one of these are under threats today, under threat today, and this is something which has been in the making for some time. For instance, if you look at people, after 9/11, the state came back as an important entity in world politics. Fearful of terrorism, states began to put curbs on immigration. They began to scrutinize their own citizens. The refugee crisis and Europe's response to it, again, are examples where free movement of people was not allowed even on humanitarian grounds. And as economic crisis spreads across the world, there will be attempts from people in the global south to move towards the north, but there will be resistance equally from the north because migrants will be seen as carriers of disease. If you look at goods and capital, the US-China trade war predates the pandemic. Efforts were already on to decouple their bilateral trade. And today, what we see that countries are trying to shorten their supply chains. Again, this was a trend which was visible earlier when Chinese labor costs increased and as the US-China trade war intensified. So the pandemic has accelerated the trend towards deglobalization, partly because paradoxically, globalization is what has allowed the virus to spread so fast across the world. So countries are now beginning to see interdependence more as a threat and not as an advantage. As for free flow of ideas and information, states are moving towards becoming surveillance states and increasingly clamping down on dissent. And while this was something which used to be under the curtain earlier, it was veiled earlier, today it is justified in the name of the pandemic with, all kinds of apps are being mandatory, are being made mandatory, facial recognition tools are being used by many countries, all in the name of the pandemic. The second trend is about multilateralism. Where does multilateralism go after COVID? Again, multilateral institutions also saw their heyday in the 1990s. You had hundreds of organizations coming up in the hope that the world could work together. Today, these hopes are fading, and there are three reasons for this. One is because none of these organizations were ever really representative. Today, the second reason is that today the same country which helped to hold up these organizations is walking out of them, the United States. It is walked out of the WHO, it has problems with the WTO, it has been threatening the United Nations. Third reason is that with the return of nationalism, states will hesitate to cede authority to supranational bodies. And as they turn inward, nationalism will affect multilateralism, and countries will have less capacity in terms of time and material and resources to cooperate on geopolitical shocks. So multilateral institutions like the WHO could become venues for intensified competition between the United States and China. And instead, we could probably see more and more plurilaterals, which are more flexible coalitions would emerge. The third is a decline of the United States. The US was in decline even before the pandemic, but what the pandemic has really done is to expose the weak underbelly of the United States to the rest of the world. Its terrible health infrastructure, systemic racism, which was amplified because colored people were affected disproportionately by the pandemic, a highly polarized society, and a president who was much more focused on social media tweets than on governing. So US prestige and moral authority has been badly affected. And the global distribution of power will continue to shift eastwards because the Asian countries, except for India perhaps, have managed to weather the storm better than their European and American counterparts. However, I think there is a silver lining for the United States in all of this because before the pandemic, China's rise seemed inexorable, but the pandemic has slowed it down. So in that sense, there is a little bit of benefit for the United States. The fourth trend is recession. As I said before, all countries are going to be affected by economic crisis. Job losses will be in the millions, and already we are seeing some really worrisome figures in the United States and in India. And this economic turmoil could lead to domestic upheavals in several countries. Perhaps we'll see more states failing, more human rights violation, and the rest of the world would not be very interested in intervening like in the past. And that's again a problem. There's also potential for conflict if countries feel that their rivals are weaker than them, and also external conflict can serve as useful political distraction from domestic troubles. The fifth trend is the rise of nationalism. As economic troubles rise, we are likely to witness more nationalism across the world. Again, this was a trend that you could see in Europe. If you look at Hungary, if you look at Philippines, and this is something which was Turkey again. So citizens of countries which are affected by corona started to be treated in racist ways, whether they were Asians or whether they were Iranians. In the initial days, countries began to ban exports of essential medical equipment. Borders were shut, and the pandemic has actually amplified some national and ethnic divides, and this could really lead to the persecution of ethnic minorities. In fact, we have seen several cases of vaccine nationalism, particularly the kind of actions that Trump has done. The sixth trend is the idea of the surveillance state has become embedded with the pandemic, and this has the support from surveillance capital. So we're moving towards a less open or a less free world, as Stephen Walt puts it. And governments across the world have used the crisis to give themselves emergency powers, moving them further away from democracy. Again, this is something which could lead to domestic turbulence. The seventh is US-China rivalry. There is going to be intensified great power rivalry between the United States and China. The previous speaker has already spoken about this, but we could discuss this in the Q&A. So I'm going to cut that short for now. The eighth is that what people like Francis Fukuyama say, that the welfare state could come back. So the pandemic has exposed the weaknesses and strengths of governments across the world. And those countries which have good state capacities and they have good, competent bureaucracies and good leadership have done better. So people might again turn back to the state for public goods and social security nets. The ninth is something which has been discussed everywhere, the erosion of the liberal international order. John Ikenberry had said that the liberal international order has always been tied to US power. So US decline will certainly contribute to the erosion of the international order. The America First policy is something which has undermined the rules-based international order. The US itself has been attacking the institutions walking out of Paris, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the JCPOA. And this has all happened even before Trump. For instance, it bombed Serbia, invaded Iraq without approval from the United Nations Security Council. It has been attacking allies, fighting with China and Russia. China, on its part, has also been not really following the rules-based order. Actions in Hong Kong and India, South China Sea are examples. Russia too has acted against global norms, particularly in Ukraine. So has the West. The 10th trend that I was looking at is the idea of non-traditional security will have to be given much more importance. And I believe as a teacher, I think this could spell doom for humanities and social sciences, because science subjects might be given much more emphasis. So what are the implications or options for India in all of this? The future, of course, is going to be much more turbulent. How does India navigate these trends? I would like to address this in 2 points, domestic and foreign policy. In domestic policy, I think this is an opportunity for India to see if we can convert this crisis into an opportunity. So the Prime Minister has already talked about self-reliance, Atmanirbhar, but this is something which will take time building domestic capacity, and it could be criticized for being protectionist, but then that is where most countries are going. The second is that with more digitization in the world, I think there are more opportunities for India's IT sector, which means we could probably invest more in vocational training. And I would also see this as an opportunity for India to rebuild its infrastructure, physical infrastructure, health infrastructure, digital and manufacturing structure. This could also kind of help reduce, address the issue of unemployment. Defense indigenization, another opportunity is there, and some steps have already been taken by India. And surveillance is, of course, likely to increase, like in most countries. The silver lining for India in all of this is that I think oil prices will likely remain low for some time, and which means that there'll be less budgetary constraints for India to kind of do all of these, rebuilding and building. In foreign policy, India's soft power was significantly enhanced because through its medical diplomacy, it's been training foreign personnel, sending medical supplies to over 123 countries, sending doctors to some countries, over 50%, around 50% funding to the SAARC Emergency Fund. And I think in the larger scheme of things, India really should continue to pursue multi-alignment, play all sides, get benefits from whoever you can get it from. And I think it would be really premature for India to choose either the United States or China right now, because you don't know what the outcome of this particular Cold War between the United States and China is. And who knows, they might even come to a modus vivendi and come to and form a duopoly or a G2, and that would be like the worst case scenario for India. So, and this is particularly important in the context of US retrenchment from the world. So the idea, I think the strategy should be for India to hedge and balance simultaneously so that we get maximum strategic autonomy. And we need to still maintain good relations with both the Chinese as well as the Americans. I don't subscribe to this theory of putting all our eggs into the American basket, because ultimately, all said and done, geography still remains destiny. So India needs to carve an independent space for itself, showcase leadership as a middle power, build coalitions of the willing, build plurilaterals. I think India, Japan, and Australia are already talking about the idea of a supply chain pact. So I think there'll be more plurilaterals, which will be based on the policy of horses for courses. And India really should be part of many more of these plurilaterals. India should also try to shape great power relations in favor of itself. And this is something which is not impossible, because India has good relations with all of the great powers except for China. Again, in the multilateral era, I think this is a great opportunity for India to shape the agenda, try and increase its influence, make them much more representative. I think the WHO is a great candidate for reform at this point. And last but not least, I think India really needs to prioritize its relationship with its neighborhood. In South Asia, I know right now we don't seem to be having good relations with most of our neighbors. We started well with the SAARC Emergency Fund, but then I think we didn't really follow up on it. And I think India really needs to realize that for it to walk away a little unscathed or to deal with the COVID pandemic or the repercussions of the pandemic, it really needs peace in its periphery. It cannot have neighbors who are worried about its actions, or it cannot remain worried about what its neighbors are doing. So it really needs to prioritize South Asia, its relations with South Asia. I'll stop there, and I look forward to any questions that you may have. I hope I've kept to time. I don't know.
Yes, Dr. Uma, very nice. 14 minutes and 7 seconds.
Thank
That
you.
was wonderful. All right, let me invite the third speaker. Dr. Ashish Shukla is the research faculty from the Indian Council of World Affairs, India. So he's going to talk on the Indian perspective on the post-COVID-19 world order. Please go ahead, Dr. Shukla.
Thank you very much, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, very well. You're very clear.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Nepal Institute of International Cooperation and Engagement, especially Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, Research Director of the Institute, for inviting me to share my thoughts and ideas with you all. This is a very timely initiative on part of NIICE to discuss and debate issues that are going to impact our future in a remarkable way. A lot has already been said by my co-panelists, two co-panelists, who have beautifully covered various aspects of the issue. There is not much left in that sense for me to talk about, but let me also give it a try and give you some perspective which may be useful in understanding what's going to come in near future. Realist stream of thought have long dominated the discourse in international relations, which primarily considered states being solely responsible for the security and well-being of their people. Thus, they argued in favor of maximizing power as well as security, depending on which strand of realism one follows. If you happen to be an offensive realist, you will talk about maximizing power. However, if you belong to the defensive realist tradition, you will talk about maximizing security of the nation. Liberals, on the other hand, consider security and well-being of the people a common goal which could be achieved through cooperation and coordination. The neoliberal institutionalists emphasize upon creating international institutions to tackle common challenges faced by the world in general and states in particular. Both realists and liberals were right in their own way. However, security by and large continued to be defined by states in terms of securing the territorial integrity of a nation, for which one needed to invest in advanced weapons and advanced weapon systems. Not much thoughts were given to secure the individual for whose benefit every other institution under the sun came into existence. This has thoroughly been exposed by the ongoing COVID-19 crisis. The pre-COVID-19 world, if you see, it was a votary of globalization, and globalization, as you know, is generally understood in terms of an interconnected world, increased interconnected world in that sense. If I were to quote famous British sociologist Anthony Giddens, who actually defined it as the intensification of worldwide social relations, which link distant localities in such a way that local happenings are shaped by events occurring many miles away and vice versa. Hyper-globalists take a positive view of globalization and argue in favor of reducing barriers to the extent that makes state sovereignty sometimes meaningless or irrelevant. That is their idea. That meant a liberalized visa regime and free movement of men, money, and materials, as we know, 3 M's of globalization. In contrast, the skeptics reject the very idea and underline the fact that states and geopolitics continue to be the main actors shaping the world order. Ever since the emergence of globalization as a potent force in international relations, the world community became increasingly acquainted to the structured arguments peddled by both the hyper-globalists and skeptics. If you have to find out the truth lies somewhere in between and is not only recognized by scholars and practitioners of international relations and diplomacy, but also by various international organizations, including the World Health Organization. WHO defines globalization as the opening of international borders to increasingly fast flows of goods, services, finance, people, and ideas, and the changes in institutions and policies at national and international levels that actually facilitate or promote such flows. However, with the same token, WHO underlines the fact that globalization has the potential for both positive and negative effects on development and health. The COVID-19 pandemic, which the world community is trying hard to tackle, at present is the most suitable example of negative effects of globalization on human health. It has not only disrupted markets and shattered lives of people across the world, but it has also exposed the competence of the governments, irrespective of the kind of government you are having throughout the world, be it democracy, be it authoritarian government, or anything like that. The humanity has witnessed very few events or catastrophes having the ability to authoritatively redefine and reshape the new world order. COVID-19 outbreak, to my mind, is one such catastrophe which may lead to a fundamental shift in international relations. The world, it appears, will never be the same again, and you must be knowing through various reports and sources that this is going to be the case. The COVID-19 outbreak will become the new reference point in international relations. As earlier we used to refer the word in pre-9/11 and post-9/11. So now we are going to refer pre-COVID and post-COVID international relations. Besides securing the territorial integrity, states would also focus on human security. That is the effect of this COVID-19, that apart from focusing on territorial integrity, states are now also going to invest in human health, especially that would actually enhance human security in the end. Post-COVID-19 international relations are going to be different in many, many ways, which requires academics, statesmen, and practitioners of international relations to get together and restructure the international system. As of now, we don't see any meaningful effort in this direction. However, as NIIC has taken an initiative, we are also discussing it. So we may come up with something which may be useful to understand our future. And since we don't know definitely what's going to happen, but we can have a calculated guess. And what those calculated guesses could be, I'm going to throw some light upon that. Firstly, to me, it seems state sovereignty will regain the prominence. However, free market economy would not take a backseat completely. To quote a famous scholar called Stephen M. Walt, the pandemic will strengthen the state and reinforce nationalism. So in the name of nationalism, you may see a lot of changes happening across the globe. They may be good for the short term. They may be good for the long term, but we don't know what kind of changes states are going to take in this particular period. And if I am allowed to quote Shiv Shankar Menon, so what he says that using his own word, that government is back. So market is actually going to take a back seat, but not completely, as I said. Secondly, states will become much more protective and conservative in their approach. If I were to quote Richard N. Haas, who says that coronavirus crisis will, at least for a few years, lead most governments to turn inward, focusing on what takes place within their borders rather than on what happens beyond that. Thirdly, rules of engagement at various international institutions would be renegotiated and in some cases could be changed drastically. Fourthly, if I have to say, with the decline of American prominence in international system, we'll witness a more aggressive China. An example is already before us, especially in this region, in the form of recent developments in Ladakh region. I think about a day ago, 29th and 30th night, we had some developments in that region where Chinese tried to assert, or not assert actually, they tried to they tried to move their military in an area which doesn't belong to them, but they were stopped by Indian armed forces. If I have to refer in this situation Kishore Mahbubani, Kishore Mahbubani says that the COVID-19 pandemic will not fundamentally alter global economic directions. It will only accelerate a change that had already begun, a move away from United States-centric globalization to a more China-centric globalization. So now China is going to gain prominence. And my final point, finally, there will be realignment of forces at multiple levels to deal with the fast-changing geostrategic and geopolitical situation. It is in this context we in the region have to reorient, or we have to say we have to redefine our foreign policy goals, and we have to work out a mechanism to achieve our national and regional interests in that context. I would like to stop here and thank again NIICE for inviting me to share my thoughts and ideas. Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Shukla, thank you so much. Yes, 11 minutes and 30 seconds. And now we have the fourth and the last speaker, Dr. Ashish, Dr. Binayak Sundas is the assistant professor in the Center for Himalayan Studies, University of North Bengal, India. Dr. Sundas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes, very nice.
So I just realized that everybody has taken less time than they were allotted, and we counted
No,
that amount like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
No,
you have 3 more minutes.
Yes, sir. There,
Also,
Nepali so Basnyat gives me a little bit extra time as well on account of nepotism. Anyhow, I while listening to all of my co-panelists and the wonderful sort of debate, the discourse that just happened, I realized something. I think my paper is slightly out of place here because, as the Americans say, it feels like I'm coming to a gunfight with a knife. But then perhaps it's also necessary to speak of the other side of all the dynamics that you all kind of spoke about. Sometimes in the realm of IR, and perhaps Rahmanji and Shuklaji would agree, sometimes the realm of IR, humanity is a little lost. We forget that we are not just states, but we are also people living in the smaller communities. Because to add to what Dr. Shukla was saying about how nationalism might be the new find a new expression. I would imagine it's not just nationalism, but rather more localism that we will tend to see as the new normal. And hence, what I'm going to speak about today about how there is the rise of the local in the global sort of pandemic. My area is the area that I speak about is also very, very small. I'm going to talk about a small town known as Kalimpong. But the thing is, Kalimpong falls right in between sort of Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan, and then China. As a matter of fact, from where I'm sitting, Bangladesh is about 6 kilometers that side, Nepal is about 6 kilometers this side, China is about, and that's the best I can do to sort of connect my paper with whatever you all have been saying. You see, community participation from the very get-go was seen as one of the most essential components in the collective sort of response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, range from the entire sort of enforcing compliance with the lockdown to the steps that were taken to ease restriction, to community support, to volunteering. The idea of community being central to all of these responses was again and again reiterated. Then you have the global health guidelines that sort of stressed on the importance of communities participation, which included sort of incorporation of insights and ideas from diverse communities, and was sort of central to the co-production of health, whereby health professionals and administration would sort of work together with the communities and thereby plan, research, deliver, evaluate the best possible sort of health promotion and healthcare sort of services. The argument, if anything, against all of this, as one went through all of the sort of the various literature that was coming out at this point of time about the use of community in this battle, was the fact that if anything, that the state has only been telling the community what to do, whereas it was taking very little from the community, in regard of what the shortfalls were and what was the best sort of possible paths to be taken. That if communities were able to provide insights, then these would be very, very helpful in overcoming the stigma and the structural barriers, so to speak, and they were actually very well pleased to work with the state and as well as the other sort of stakeholders in the region to work out a very diverse and a collective sort of a response. As such, the idea was that with the community, it may be possible to devise what you would call a very tailored solution to the needs of a very rather diverse population, especially in the case of India. And in all of these sort of discourses and reading all of these papers and statements by politicians, one would get the feeling that the communities seem like a silver bullet, that if it doesn't even need to be used properly, it just needs to be used extensively, and it would be able to stop the flow of this global pandemic dead on the tracks by using this very local sort of a solution. All of this is sort of premised on the idea that community's role is benevolent. And if you go back into how this conception of community as being benevolent, of using the community's knowledge production, so on and so forth, I think one would need to go to the 1990s. And I go to the 1990s, I don't mean to say that the idea of community begins in the 1990s. That would be absurd, especially for a history student like myself to say. I mean the specific understanding of a community, the socio-political and the cultural overtones, specifically in this side of the Himalayas, beyond nation states, that actually can be traced to the 1990s, when the concept of indigeneity became a very prominent way of mobilizing support for ethnic political sort of issues, not just here, but in the international arenas. If you remember, there were initiatives by the UN and other international organizations that made the discourse of indigeneity a very viable way, whereby many groups could claim rights within the state. If you remember, it was 1993 that UN declared the International Year for world's indigenous people, the world over. It was exactly at this point that the Janjati movement in Nepal, which began in 1990s, one would actually trace it further back, but the usual idea is that it began in the early 1990s. They started getting associated with this concept of indigeneity, which actually culminated, I think it was in 2004, when the term Adivasi was appended to the Nepali Janajati Mahasangh, making it Nepali Janajati Adivasi Mahasangh, or Nepali Federation of Indigenous Nationalities, whose resonance then found its space not just in the Nepali nation state, but rather in the Nepali geography. Now, what do I mean by the Nepali geography? I mean, by Nepali geography, I mean the entire space that is occupied by Nepali speakers across the Himalayas, which would include not just the nation state of Nepal, but also places like Sikkim, Darjeeling, parts of Bhutan, and parts of Arunachal Pradesh. A group that is held together not just by language, but rather by ethnic and caste formations. If I could give an example, Basnyat Major General Basnyat is still a Basnyat in Kathmandu or in Darjeeling. That caste identity doesn't change, as I am a Dome either in Darjeeling or in Kathmandu, and that is what I mean by the rather Nepali geography. And this conception of indigeneity of the community found resonance across the borders in Sikkim and in Darjeeling, where political sort of movements started mimicking this kind of indigenous dialogues, which led, as now in Darjeeling, to the formation of boards based on communities: the Tamang Development Community, the Lepcha Development Community, I think the Chetri Bound is the Hitkari community, whatever, the Damai Development Board, etc., etc. Which basically puts the onus of development specifically on the community, believing that the traditional knowledge that became a very, very sort of a something that was reiterated over and over again. The indigenous knowledge production, whether it was about medicines, whether it was about the kinds of houses that would be built, it's almost an exoticism, of the community that starts to take place. And it was believed that if you used the indigenous knowledge, especially in this part of Himalayas, whether it was the Lepchas, whether it was of the Tamangs, etc., then you could actually, and especially medicines and etc., you could actually avoid natural calamities of that sort. And this was when the sanctity of I believe, a certain kind of sanctity of the community actually began. And all of this was linked to a certain kind of perception that community meant harmony. And to go with the indigenous community's knowledge was almost sort of synonym for engaging in sustainable development. There was this concept of being in harmony with nature, so to speak. But as Gillian Rose, the famous geographer, points out, the problem with community studies is that community is seen synonymous with harmony. And that is how most academics see it. That is how most policymakers have been seeing it. A community is anything but that. A community is a contested space. There are conflicts not just within a community, whether it is about power structure in various forms, but also it is an idea that is contested about. And the power dynamics is expressed through several ways, whether it is caste, whether it's class, ethnic, linguistic, religious, etc. And it is this power dynamics within the said local that unfortunately in the space that I'm going to talk about has come to the fore during this global pandemic. When the first responses, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the kind of administrative unit that we have here. It's known as the Gorkhaland Territorial Administration, or rather in short, the GTA. When the first responses of the local administration was discussed, it was crowdsourced, and I was also a part of it. And even I wrote that the community and its role had to be central to this particular responses of any form, whether it was the containment effort or whether it was the distribution of resources, and that we had to divide it into these various samajas, etc., and these various local groups, ethnic centric local groups, or geographical local groups that had to be central to this particular effort. And once the first case of COVID-19 came out, I think it was in April, what we saw was that we were anything but prepared for this, because the kind of paranoia that seeped in, oh God, it was just unbelievable. The first thing that happened as a response to this was burning of a particular herb known as titepati. Now, I think Basnyat sir is familiar with the term, as well as the rest of you all who don't know it. It's a herb that's used here for, it's at best it's an anticoagulant, and it's usually used for driving spirits away, and it has no effect on the virus. But the state administration would not tell people that that the burning of the herb had no effect, because it was part of the indigenous knowledge production, and it sort of allowed, even encouraged it by supplying titepati to a lot of villages. And this, if anything, at the very get-go should have been a sort of a signal for sort of things to come. What we saw then was one of the first things that we saw was the rise of vigilantism, which was one of the defining problems initially. You saw a lot of these youths who have a certain proclivity towards violence with a certain kind of behavior. And what I'm trying to say in very fancy academic term is who I'm talking about is this, what in South Asia you call gunda, badmash, and in Darjeeling you call rowdies. You saw these people becoming more and more active in trying to enforce a vigilantist sort of an idea of what behavior then should have been, which sort of sometimes seeped into concepts of moral policing. Usually these people are looked down upon, but now they had social legitimacy from the society, because it was viewed that their role was vital, and these people saw this as a route to gaining political power, because there is a precedence of how strong men, especially in places like Darjeeling, whether you refer to people like Bimal Gurung, etc., how they have had a reputation of being strong men, and then they sort of gained political power. So this is how most of these people sort of started behaving and tried to initially sort of dominate said locality. And it wasn't just them, it was round about just anybody with political ambition at this point of time. It was doctors, or it was professors, it was any local businessman, anybody started becoming what in Darjeeling you would call as corona leaders. People who started becoming more and more vocal about how resources and who the resources should be allotted, how discipline should be implemented, so on and so forth. And all this bickering and backering that tend to happen within the local community did exactly the opposite of what people had hoped for would happen. It created a huge kind of sort of confusion about how the response was to be there, because everybody wanted to be a leader, everybody wanted to sort of have a say in what to do, everybody wanted to be seen doing it. Now, moving from more of these general sort of examples, I move to the more specific. In Kalimpong, about 8 kilometers, there is a small municipality ward known as Topkhana. Most of you all are familiar with the Persian Urdu Hindi term. Topkhana is generally an armory. It probably was an armory of the old British, or of the Nepal, of the Gorkha dynasty, or of the Bhutni, whoever at one point had sort of occupied Kalimpong. But the place is known as Topkhana. It's a very interesting history for which we don't have time for. Now, Topkhana has a very, I would stop to call it a multicultural society, but it does have a society that is, where a lot of people, whether it is Bengali Muslims or Bihari Muslims, dominant of Nepalis there, of course, with Chetris being the highest numbers, followed by Tamangs and then by Domai, and a few Marwadis and Hindu Biharis here and there. More than telling you the number of which community lives where, I would rather like to point out that there is a system, a structure that is in place where religious identities and caste identities had not sort of come to the fore. And it was something where linguistic, because everybody spoke Nepali there, that linguistic identity was more and more sort of dominant, and everybody sort of identifying, or rather forced to identify with the Nepali language and the Nepali ethnic movement known as Gorkhaland. What we saw then was, as soon as the Tablighi Jamaat, if you all remember this incident happened in Delhi, the Muslims who were living there, people who, were people who, neighbors who had seen them every day, suddenly started viewing them with suspicion, and it was unimaginable. The local ward commissioners would go to them, tell them not to allow anybody from outside to come there, would not allow them to move outside the house, would not buy from their shops. Bread was nobody had bread for about a month, because the idea was bread was made by Muslims. It was unbelievable. The manner in which these people rise. When I spoke to them, they spoke about being suffocated inside their houses, by people that for example, one Chacha, I cannot take his name because he asked me specifically not to take his name. I'm going to call him by the generic term. I called him Chacha. He referred to the fact that my neighbor, who saw me every day get up from my house, come to the shop, suddenly thought I'd gone to Delhi. And he was like, when did I go to Delhi and to this Jamaat? I don't even know what that is. And it was a very sort of painful thing to hear from. The manner in which this religious identity sort of suddenly became dominant. The other is the fact that near Topkhana, there's another small housing colony known as the Sweeper Line, which is housed by a community that very politely is called the Harijan, not so politely is called the Mehtar, which is a very, very derogatory term to use. And I only use this in an academic sense. Please forgive me if I hurt any sensibilities. Most of these people are people who are third or fourth generations who have lived in Darjeeling. And some of them work as Group B staff in the government hospital nearby. Now, the very fact that they worked in the hospital, and this is not even the COVID-19 hospital, just a general hospital, they were already viewed with suspicion. The moment that hospital was shut down because of some corona cases or some kind of rumors, these people were put under lockdown. Entire housing community was put under lockdown. Just the specific community and the specific housing project. And once 2 or 3 of them, they were completely boycotted by the by the localities nearby, which included not allowing them to buy groceries, which included not allowing them to move outside their buildings, and all of that. Now, this is not to say, now if I combine these two, the manner in which the sweeper, and then the funny thing is, these people, if you combine this incident of the Sweeper Line along with the Muslim incident, it's not to say that the coronavirus sort of brought about, the element of either casteism or anti-Islam within the people. The point is, it always existed. This just allowed it to come to the fore. Which then points to the question of, is community and giving community, or quote unquote community, the right to sort of, the central, to think of the community as being this benevolent, structure that would look at everyone in a certain, equal manner, is actually flawed, as we can see with these two communities, right? And the point is, these Harijans are treated as untouchables, not just by the upper caste, but also by the Nepali untouchable groups of, people like Damai, Kami, and Sarki. These are the lowest of low, and they have felt the brunt of this the highest. Moving from this sort of the caste, there is also the class angle. I remember one particular person known as Tegh Bahadur Busal Buzadame, who went back to his home from Siliguri. He was forced to stay in house quarantine for about a month. There's another case of another lady who went to a place known as Gorabari, where she was also forced to stay for about 2 months, which is all fine. That is the way that the new normal should have been, except this is not uniformly implemented. If you are a person of higher caste, if you are a person of higher class, if you are a person of means, then you can easily dodge all of these quarantines. It's not uniformly implemented, which, if anything, is very, very, very dangerous. There's a lot of aspect where a few good words here and there can help you escape the quarantine. And this leads to another problem that I saw while I was in my field this time, the fact that quarantine certificates are being sold. If you want to buy a quarantine certificates if it's home quarantine, it's about 1,000. If it's the proper quarantine, it's slightly more expensive. And there's also the case of where
Dr. Sundas, you have another minute, please.
Oh, all right, sir. This is about 1 minute, and I'll sum it up.
Yeah.
So there's the selling of certificates that's sort of going on, and then there is the reverse migration that one has seen. Because of the initial migration that had taken place to cities and the remittances that had changed the power structure somewhat within these more rural sort of areas, which is still based on a very agrarian structure. Now, because of the reverse migration, what one saw, and like the people I spoke to, there is a restructuring of the traditional power structures, whether caste, class, ethnic, religious, etc., within these villages. Now you have a very definitive sense of how there is a going back to the more the traditional structure of power dynamics within the town. To end, I would like to say that what we are seeing now is a complete change in the landscape of the local. The kind of power dynamics that are coming up, the kind of changes that are coming up is not necessarily for the good. And when the state continuously sort of depends on the communities to do its work, which is, the fact that the quarantine certificates are being sold, the fact that people don't need to sit for quarantines, the fact that people are being harassed is one of the major reasons for why there is a bomb in the number of corona cases that has taken place recently. So the rise of the local is there. I think the state is more to blame for how it could not see or foresee this kind of problems that now we are seeing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Binayak Sundasi. And I think we're still in time, so we have another 25 minutes for question and answers. Dr. Pramod, do you have any questions on the table there? Dr. Pramod? Dr. Jaishwal?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any questions on the Facebook and the live things there? I have not received anything on the platform.
No, sir, no question.
All right. Okay. So as you round up, can I just maybe Dr. Mr. Rahman, could you please take a little bit of time and maybe take about 2 or 3 minutes on trying to explain more on how the multipolar world is going to go about, or you talked about the replacement of the existing international, like the United Nations, lesser role, and the future of globalization, the question. Can you just highlight a little bit, maybe on this point, please? Thank you. Mr. Rahman, you need to unmute. Mr. Rahman, can you hear me? You need to unmute, Mr. Rahman, if you can hear me.
So I think he's saying he needs permission from the host or something to unmute.
Dr. Jaishwal? Dr. Jaishwal?
Yes, sir.
Can you unmute Mr. Rahman, please?
1 minute.
Is Dr. Uma, are you online?
I am, sir.
All right, okay. As we were waiting, like you brought out the issue of like take this as an opportunity, and you have the domestic and the foreign. Could you please explain a little bit more on India and the neighborhood? How maybe good ways or maybe a few policies that both the, let's say, the smaller neighbors and India should take for a better environment?
Okay, thank you, sir. Yeah, well, I think most people would agree that we seem to have lost the neighborhood, at least for the time being. And I think there's a lot of concern in India that China might be, overtaking India in the neighborhood. So the idea of trying to reclaim the neighborhood from China, I don't think it's possible for us to completely eschew China or to get China out of all of the neighbors. But what India really can do is one, I think India needs to be much more sensitive to the concerns of its neighbors, whether it is, Nepal, the issue over the map. For instance, I believe the Nepalese ambassador kept trying to, getting an audience from the foreign secretary, and he didn't get it. So I think India needs to be much more sensitive to neighbors, treat them with respect, and unlike China, India does not have huge capacity in terms of finances. So what India really can do is continue whatever aid projects it has in the neighborhood. Focus on, look, India's advantage compared to China is that it has certain cultural similarities with the countries in the neighborhood. And what it can really do is try and build a human capacity in these countries as well, because India's advantage is that it has this huge human resource abilities. So I really think India should start talking to the neighbors on equal terms. Should not be act like a big brother, and it should also try to be much more generous to its neighbors. I'm not saying that India can match Chinese aid, but India can match aid in terms of capacity building, which is something that India really should start focusing on. That's my 2 bits about
Yeah,
the
thank you.
neighborhood.
Yeah,
But
please.
I think basic is respect. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Uma. Dr. Rahman, I think you're unmuted now.
Okay, sir, thank you very much. Could you please repeat your questions again? I'm sorry if I just
Like as you ended your presentation, you're talking about the lesser role of the United Nations and the future of globalization, is it? So when the last two and a half centuries like have been, I mean, the economic stability and the security stability has been have been is because of globalization. And so how do you think the things will move about? I mean, you can particularly focus on the regional aspect or explain more on the multipolar world.
Okay, so sir, listen, sir, I have to say that globalization mainly promoted by Western liberal world, mainly the Western countries and United States of America through the liberalism or liberal. They're using the, argument of Adam Smith and many more liberal theorists. But I want to say, in the pandemic time, if you deconstruct the event that occurred in last 9 months, then you see that none of the Western countries and or Western liberal countries, they didn't focus on globalization in this pandemic time. Rather than it is China that is, Chinese premier always focusing on, we are focusing globalization, liberal trade, but this is a Chinese version of globalization, I think so, because you know what, in the globalization, basic globalization, already that was also pointed out by other speaker about the Anthony Giddens point. Basic globalization always related with the argument of free market, also the liberal idea of democracy. Okay, but Chinese version, I think that it's not directly supported the idea of the globalization that we witness in last 3 decades or 2 decades. Okay, specifically. Second, I think that the path for the globalization will be challenging in coming days, the globalization that we know, okay, in previous. So secondly, I want to just revert your question, that is how the rule of the international organizations like UN will be halted in future, because of what, in 2016 China established one bank, that is Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. This bank is an alternative of World Bank. World Bank, previously it was known as IVRD, and IVRD was established for reconstructing the economy of Western Europe after the Second World War. So I think that AIIV also became same after the pandemic, okay? And already, in fact, my country already given a big proposals to China for loan. So I hope many more developing countries already gave their proposals for loan, as because they have they're phasing to run their government. So AIB can be an alternative. In fact, India also the important member in the AIIV. And there is another bank, that is New Development Bank, that was mainly established by the BRICS, Brazil, India, in fact, China, and Russia, and South Africa. So I think that these two organizations will be sort of alternative. They're already working. So that's why I say that existing international financial institution will be face more challenging, because they're controlled by the USA or Western power. Okay, there is a less say from the China and Asian countries. And I want to say, already in United Nations there is a problem of multilateralism. India, in fact, India also over there, they also say that they want to be the Security Council member. In fact, Germany also, in fact, Japan also. So I think that United Nations will face the crisis in coming days, because existing permanent countries will face will face more problem because of the pandemic have changed everything. So that's a response from me. And another issues, and developing countries are already looking for donors, and they have a right to choose determine their foreign policy also. And USA already failed to support their allies, very close allies. I want to share one thing, that after the conflict between China and India was supposed to expect a response from the USA, I think so. But USA they did less for the India, I think also. And there is also, in the pandemic time, there is also problem with, in fact, my country also have enough problem with Bangladesh close ally, like a traditional ally like India, in terms of these things happen because of government have a responsibility to lead their everyday tasks. Okay, this depends on financial support from the donors. Okay, they cannot do whatever they want, they need financial support. This financial support will change the world politics and international institutions. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rahman. Dr. Shukla, you talked about the pre-COVID and the post-COVID. Now, going to the latter, the post-COVID, and on the issues of nationalism and the state sovereignty, what do you think would happen to the multilateral organizations like the SHARC and BIMSTEC? How do you think it will shape post-COVID? Dr. Shukla? Doctor, we've lost Dr. Shukla here.
I'm
Okay, while we're, can you just, while we're waiting for him, to Dr. Sundas, you brought a very interesting point about the communities about the communities playing a greater role in the control of pandemic and all. Can you just highlight like how the community has been helping the government efforts on pandemic, and maybe a few suggestions that you would give how community would help in dealing or managing well for the COVID-19?
So I think, am I audible, sir?
Yes,
So I
yes.
think the main problem with this was how the government automatically assumed that the community would not have internal uh, sort of differentiations, would not have internal power plays, would not have. The state had assumed that community would work for the benefit of all, which I mentioned derives its origins from the 1990s. Has the community in that sense been helpful? Well, initially, in the immediate response, especially when the lockdown was taking place in context of resource distributions and understanding how specific household, not even, I'm not even talking about villages, I'm talking about specific household and specific needs, was something that only a very basic unit of a gaon can determine, through, I'm not even talking to the panchayat, but just specifically gaon ko samaj le, how it can determine how a specific household can needs, whether in terms of milk, or whether in terms of medicines, etc. And in that sense, this was a success, in the sense that the community was able to sort of what I mentioned earlier about having tailored solution to these aspects. The problem was, looking at these initial successes, the state started giving more and more autonomy to the community, again premised on the fact that the community would again work for the benefit of all. But as time went on, we saw that it doesn't. There are ethnic fault lines, and in case of the Nepali society, there are caste fault lines that start getting more and more exaggerated as time goes on. In my suggestion, that's the thing. I was, while writing this paper, I was wondering, if one were to say community is progressively failing to provide adequate support in this COVID fight, then what is the alternative? It's in this global pandemic. I don't know if there's any good solutions to anything. But if the state were to take cognizance of the fact that the community has these kind of internal differentiations, and would to sort of retain some of the power, especially in context of boycotting and lockdowns, and sort of cordoning off areas, if the state could sort of keep that power to itself and not allow for village communities or local communities to sort of do that arbitrarily, then in what I'm trying to say, the state behaves like a referee and keeps a very vigilant sort of count of what it's doing, instead of just allocating resources on resources. That might be probably a better way to sort of do it. So I don't know if this answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
So,
Is Dr. Shukla in? No, all right. Okay, we have another 10 minutes to go. So I think thank you so much for all the panelists. I think it was a wonderful presentation on the post-COVID new order or new normal, or things. But definitely what we can really see is the Indo-Pacific region, and the South Asia particularly, because of the fundamental role that India will play on the post-COVID dynamics, like including all these smaller states, where we can refer to, as Rahman was also saying, that the Cold War has begun. I do agree with him. But if you look into what the Secretary of State has been reiterating from time to time, is the ideology factor, the ideology on the free world and the communists. So he's been reiterating that. So the alliance and partnership that the Americans are looking for is expediting. So the 14 countries that border China, and India's role will play an important part in the post-COVID order. The other thing that I like to highlight is on the region where we come from, the arc of the Himalayas plays an important part. I touched upon in the brief about the militarizations of the Himalayas. The Himalayas can be divided into subsectors. We can divide it into the Yunnan bordering China as the far west, and the east is the Arunachal Pradesh till Sikkim, and the center could be Nepal, the 1400 kilometers, and the middle would be the Uttarakhand and the Himalayan Pradesh, and the west would be the Jammu Kashmir, where the China-India border skirmishes are going on right now. So, and if you look at this and the access for the access for China into the Bay of Bengal, or South Asia being as a bridge to the Bay of Bengal, and the general political feelings and the political theory of either India being surrounded by China or China being surrounded by the West, persists. So with this, um, I think we should be seeing more of the changes in the coming future, and the relationship between the India and the neighbor countries matters a lot, and the transparency in the relationship between China and the smaller states matters a lot. So I think the session today was an excellent session. Thank you so much, all the panelists once again. And thank you once again, NICE and the Water Policy Center for organizing such a great event. And thank you. Can I hand this over to the
Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to an end of this session, it is my great honor to propose a vote of thanks on the behalf of NICE and WPC. I would like to express our gratitude and sincere thanks to Major General Binoj Basnyat for accepting our request to chair this session. A sincere thanks goes to all the speakers for delivering such a comprehensive and insightful presentation. We are honored to have all the speakers with us here today. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from diplomatic community, experts, academia, and different organizations. But last but not the least, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for our audience who have participated in this webinar and those who have watched us on live. We are truly honored to have you all with us this evening and hope to stay connected with you in the future as well. I request everyone to join our next session also. Thank you.